What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon 1 year post-release, which has been a very busy year for Tainted Grail. In fact, numerous fixes, free DLCs, additional content, a paid expansion even, and apparently even more to come, judging by the subtle foreshadowing in many of their updates. It looks like Tainted Grail has a lot going on. In fact, it, I believe, sold 1 million copies as of January of this year. And given that I enjoyed the game quite a bit, and I think it was one of the better games that I played last year, I thought it only fitting then that I double back and take a look at it and how all those updates and things have been received, while also giving me a convenient excuse to go over some of that free stuff that has been added that I have not covered explicitly. Now, people love to compare Tainted Grail to Skyrim. I don't like to do that personally, but I can see why people make those comparisons, and in many ways, Tainted Grail has an amazing sense of exploration. It's a lot of fun. There's tons of choices to be had, and yet, as fun as this game was, it is also pretty well known that it did not launch in the best of states. It was definitely rough around the edges, had a fair few problems here and there. Some jank, in particular, Act 3 was very, very bare bones. But even back then, you could see pretty much immediately, if you spent much time from the game, that there was clearly a lot of passion behind this dark Arthurian myth. But with all of that said, let's go ahead and dive in and talk about basically what this game has been up to for the past year or so, going over some of the big updates, things like that, and then looking forward a little. So, immediately post-launch, we received several, I would say, fairly large patches, sort of back-to-back. However, much of them were the same kind of thing. They were aimed at bug fixing as well as fixing quests. Now, the quests were interesting because a lot of quests would potentially break if you did something just so, forcing you to reload to an earlier save, and then there were some larger issues as well, but that is what basically patch 1.03, 1.04, 1.05, 6, and 7 were all about. And yet, we still did get some important stuff there as well. They did adjust some balancing pretty much right out of the gate. 1.04 even added some quality of life changes, in particular allowing you to use like stashed materials at crafting benches without having to go get them. Patch 1.06 allowed you to further talk to Arthur, who is, let's say, with you for the journey, allowing you a little bit more characterization of him as opposed to what the game launched with. And then 1.07 even added mod support for the title. And that kept the developers busy for several months until September 9th. September 9th is when patch 1.1 released, and it was quite large, bringing in several new features, notably New Game Plus, which would continue to scale with you, and actually potentially give you a challenge for the particularly overpowered builds that have still been kicking around, even though they changed and rebalanced some things along the way. 1.1 also brought us Transmog, allowing us to make use of the many fantastic looking armor sets that they have continued to add to the game, by the way. But they also started to flesh out Act 3 a little bit more here and there, namely in terms of dungeons, items, putting in some quests, that kind of stuff. Now, this is also the patch that made some pretty big changes to the initial builds that people were using, like the really high crit chance one. They kind of reined that in, though you can still do something similar. So needless to say, patch 1.1 was a big patch that definitely set things in the right direction and fixed a lot of the initial issues people had. But patch 1.15 is also an interesting one because this is where they announced the expansion that the game got alongside a free DLC. So the free DLC was basically armor for completing certain in-game tasks, like finishing up some of the longer quests, doing some side things. You would basically get an armor set for doing each of those, which was pretty cool. So there was a nice little free DLC there. The rest of the patch just being the usual fixes and changes. However, following on from that, we got the Sanctuary of Saris DLC, which was incredibly cool. It brought us to a place under the ocean nearby the island, where you could dig into the past of this place and why it exists, experiencing new bosses, enemies, encounters, quests, and what I have to personally say is what I think to be the best looking area of the entire game. I think it is gorgeous, and it was overall a very good bit of DLC. It even included its own little progression track while you were down there, and so there was plenty of things to do in addition to all of the stuff it added, like itemization wise. Right around that same time, we got patch 1.2. Patch 1.2 introduced options optional balancing changes, things you could turn on or off to adjust balance even farther, and then alongside all of that, it actually continued to add on to Act 3 with more content and bosses and encounters, that kind of stuff for you to encounter there to make that zone feel a little bit better. I still think it is a little sparse compared to the first two zones, but these days Act 3 is looking substantially better than it did on launch day for sure. Now what followed on from that was actually several free DLCs kind of back to back. So free DLC number 2 added 21 new magical weapons for you to find and acquire. Free DLC number 3 added a new dungeon called Merlin's Tomb, which came with its own bit of story and, new items and boss, the usual stuff. More recently, free DLC number 4 introduced Challenge Mode. Challenge Mode is basically a way to play through the game while also taking on debuffs as you move through. Every 2 levels and then every main area cleared, I believe, you have to pick up a debuff that will, affect the various ways you could play the game, hence the challenge in challenge mode, and then it also has its own difficulty as well. And you can even carry that forward into New Game Plus cycles, which will carry with you infinitely or until, you can finally not meet the challenge anymore. And then our most recent patch, I think literally yesterday from the time of this video, we've got patch 1.2.3, the anniversary DLC. This is just another free little DLC where you get a birthday quest that you can track down and go explore just to celebrate the game's 1-year anniversary. And so, with all of those updates and changes, which have honestly dramatically improved the game since its launch, Tainted Grail is already doing very, very well. It was doing well when it launched, to be clear, people were into it, but with all these fixes and changes, it is obviously in a much better state than it was on release day, and it's always fun to see a clear passion project continue to do well. And yet, it would seem they are not quite done with it. In their most recent updates, they've basically hinted that they've got more coming that they are going to announce, and so it would not surprise me at all to be covering this game in the future, depending on the nature of whatever that announcement actually winds up being, but it seems there will be something more going on with this game. But more than anything with this video, I just wanted to kind of encapsulate the journey that this game has taken. And that is on top of the time it spent in early access. I think they've done a fantastic job over there at taking in player feedback, both during early access and then also following on from the game's actual release, working on things like improving the third-person mode, and just genuinely doing their best to make this the best game possible. But more than anything, I think this game is great. I'm glad to have seen it done so well, and I am excited to see not only what this game has in the future, but also what questline the developer gets up to in the future, as well as whether it be more Tainted Grail, or even if they choose to do something else in the future. I'm definitely up for whatever they have planned. But for today, that is pretty much going to cover it. Certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you've been playing Tainted Grail or checking out any of their updates, I would love to hear about it down in the comments section below. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.